Hello, you beautiful human, and welcome back to another episode of Rooted. I am your host, Natalie Andrea, and I am so excited to dive into the theme of this episode because it has been one that I have explored so deeply within my own journey, and it's one that I know is very close to the heart and prevalent for so many women. And this is this whole idea of self acceptance. And on the other side of that, self rejection. The ways that we may judge or criticize or reject ourselves, whether that is on the physical level, whether that is on the more subtle, emotional, or, levels of our psyche. It's a really loaded topic and it's really potent as well. So, we're going to be looking at this theme both in general and in relation to autoimmune disease and expressions from the body, because you know how I roll. And it's a really, really interesting link here. So, stay tuned. We're going to talk about what I mean by self rejection, how this can be mirrored through the body, some prompts that you can explore to feel into what areas within yourself you may have a harder time accepting, why we tend to repress or reject certain aspects of ourself, really getting into that conversation, and how we can go about starting to meet and accept and integrate these aspects of ourselves so that we can create an environment for more ease and harmony and peace and love within ourselves. And so let's dive in. So first and foremost, what do I mean when I'm talking about self-rejection here? So when I think of self-rejection, I think of anything in and around the themes or energies of judgment towards parts of ourselves, criticism towards parts of ourselves, straight up rejection of or denial of certain parts of ourselves. And I'm talking about our physicality, like when it comes to our bodies specifically. And I'm also talking about aspects of our expression, parts of ourselves, personality traits, parts of our psyche. So really unpacking this whole theme on the different levels of our being. And some of those are more obvious. So when we look at rejection of, criticism of our physical traits, this is something that is pretty self-explanatory and probably something that most of you can relate to. At least most of the women that I speak to, my friends, my family, clients, can really, really relate to. So this might be rejection of, criticism of, judgment of some physical trait on your body, whether that is your hair, whether that is your skin, your wrinkles, some part of your body, your thighs, your butt, something on you that you tend to have a harder time accepting, or that you may judge, or that you may pick yourself apart around. And it's interesting because even though you might have all of these amazing traits within you and all of these beautiful aspects to your physical vessel, you may love your eyes or you may love other parts of yourself. It seems to be that until we've reconciled some of these facets and wounds within ourselves, a lot of our energy and thought can be directed towards the parts of ourselves that we have a harder time accepting. And so I want to give you an example that is and was really relevant for me throughout this whole journey of healing that I've been on over the last several years. And that is around my hair. So if you've heard me speak on social media in the past, you've potentially heard me speak about my hair. And if you're watching the video, you can see that I have super curly, ringlety hair. It is big, it is wild, it is bold, it's out there. And so, of course, as a child, I didn't think anything of it. You know, like we typically don't think anything of ourselves or have any sort of judgment towards ourselves until we do. And so when I reflect back on what that moment was for me when I started to judge my hair, I think it was in elementary school, and I think it was a matter of one kid, maybe two kids, commenting on my hair, making fun of my hair. And that moment right there was enough for me to all of a sudden become aware of my hair, which sounds so funny. It's something that can seem so surface level, but it's often not, because it's often this first time where we feel the sting of rejection from another. You know, being made fun of, being shamed for something can really stick with us, especially as a young child where we potentially didn't have the spaces to actually unpack and understand the context of these situations at the time. More often than not, we actually internalize these things and make it mean something about ourselves, that this thing within ourselves is actually faulty or too much or not enough, rather than understanding that people see us through their own lenses and everybody is different, everybody is unique, and there's nothing wrong with you and you're beautiful just the way you are. Typically, we see it as there is something within ourselves that needs to be changed or fixed because that part of ourselves was not accepted. It was not validated. And in fact, feeling that sting, that pain of rejection is often the very thing that we want to avoid going forward. And it's how we sort of learn to adapt ourselves to avoid that very pain of rejection going forward. So it can be that simple of a moment where all of a sudden there's a part of you wanting to avoid some sort of pain, wound, something within you. So you become willing to reject a certain trait or aspect or part of yourself in order to avoid that pain, in order to fit in order to attain the validation of someone or something outside of you, right? And so it's often through these sorts of interactions in our earlier life, it's often through media, through culture, that we are taught what is attractive, what is less attractive, what it looks like to be happy, to be successful. And we tend to go in the direction of trying to create ourselves in that image. And at these young ages, we often don't have a particularly solid sense of self and who we are. And so it's this vulnerable stage where we are trying to decide and discern and figure out who we are. And it can be wild out there with young kids. Like I'm seeing it now as an observer with my son and my daughter. My daughter is almost 9, my son is 7, and kids have a lot to say. There's a lot of social dynamics involved and a lot of energy for me is there to hold space for them and to help them unpack those experiences within their day, because it can be so quick and subtle. I've noticed where a child can make something mean something about them. You know, even if it's somebody doesn't want to play with them, all of a sudden it's like, I'm not enough. I'm bad. I'm not likable. They don't like me. Versus a lot of the time, it actually has nothing to do with that. It means nothing about that kid. It's just that they wanted to do something else that day. So it's really interesting the way that our psyche works, the way that our subconscious works, and how we derive meaning out of these very human experiences where we make things mean things about ourselves or are looking for some sort of meaning about ourselves, about where we stand within the world, how our relationships work, what we need to do to maintain some sense of safety, belonging. The belonging piece is a really big one here too. But there are all these indirect and direct messages that are coming at us around what is celebrated, what is accepted, what is validated, what is liked within us from others, from culture, from media. And we tend to want to then start to express more of that which is celebrated and honored and liked and validated, and less of those pieces of ourselves, whether they are physical traits, whether they are personality traits, aspects of our expression, qualities within ourselves. We tend to express less of those that may have been shamed or rejected in another, or disapproved of by another. And so this is how we can start to sort of adapt ourselves, our expression, our image, what we choose to place our energy in, what we place value in based on the messages that we have received from others. And that's not to say that's a bad thing per se. We can learn a lot through that process about what feels true and good to us and what doesn't. However, when we start to then disconnect from our truth and what is true for us and what is innate within us at our core, we can lose touch with those aspects of ourself in that pursuit to be approved of, to win or earn love, or approval. And so this is where this concept of rejection of self and aspects of self becomes more important and powerful. Because what I've observed is that when we reject something or some aspect of ourself on a deep enough level, when we veer far enough from our truth in order to uphold some sort of image or some way of being in order to placate or please or win the approval of others, often which is mostly unconscious, when that deviation from our truth gets large enough, through this very real rejection of certain parts of ourselves, whether that be our needs, our emotions, what is actually true for us, our desires, this is when that self-rejection can start to be mirrored by the body, through the body rejecting itself, through autoimmune dis-ease, through pain, chronic pain, or other symptoms. Because the body is really like this projection field. It's quite neutral. It's highly intelligent. And that being said, it will often reflect our psyche, our energetic state, the subconscious beliefs and patterns that we hold. And in particular, when those patterns, when those beliefs aren't actually congruent with our truth or supporting our path forward, that is when our bodies actually express to get our attention, like, hey, something is not working. Call it our body, call it our soul expressing and getting our attention through our bodies that, hey, something is actually needing your attention here because this is not actually based in your truth. What you're believing here, the way that you're operating, this is not supportive to you. And it can be this invitation or self-initiation to return home to you, to actually meet yourself beneath all of these layers of conditioning and the shoulds and all of the things we think that we need to be or look like or show up as or do to be safe, to win love, to belong, to be enough. That is the sacred invitation there within so many of the symptoms that I observe in others, that I've observed within myself. So going back to this example around my hair that I started on before I went into this whole open tangent. What I started to do when I received that criticism around my hair is I started to become conscious, self-conscious of it. And I started trying to change it. So I think I found some sort of hair gel within my parents' bathroom, and I started to slick it back in this really tight ponytail because I did not know how to style it. I didn't know how to tame the frizz. All I knew is that it was being made fun of, and I didn't like that feeling. And so my efforts were being directed towards avoiding or preventing me from having to experience that feeling again. So the only tool in my toolbox that I had was this tube of gel. So I went into this hair slick era where I would just slick my hair back, and that was that. Eventually, years forward, I started to hear about or somehow learn about this idea of hair straightening. And this was before I had like a straightening iron or anything like that. I actually used a clothes iron. And I wonder if any of you can relate to this. I used a clothes iron and actually ironed my hair with that. I had one of my best friends at the time whip out an ironing board, straighten my hair with an iron, try to get all the way up to the very roots of the hair, which, I mean, the roots of my hair have a lot of volume and curl and texture to them as well. So that is a whole undertaking. And there were many little burns suffered through this process, but nevertheless, I started to actually straighten my hair. And all of a sudden I was like, wow, oh my gosh, I can have straight hair. And this is what is desirable. And so I ran with that and started straightening my hair, and eventually was introduced to flat irons and had my whole flat ironed hair era, which, by the way, it was a whole undertaking to keep my hair straight and smooth when my natural texture is what it is. So any sort of humidity, any sort of moisture, rain, fog, whatever it was, would cause my hair to start to frizz and curl and go wild. And so much of my energy went towards trying to actually change my hair. Like literally buying like a purse-sized flat iron to keep with me, putting my hair up, wearing hoods, umbrellas at all costs. Like a lot of energy went towards trying to change what was. And I want to make a distinction here between like self-expression and experimenting and trying on different things and, makeup or styles for yourself, because there's a big difference between styling your hair differently or doing your makeup differently or wearing clothes differently in the context of play and self-expression versus doing so to actually change yourself or fix something that you believe is faulty or not attractive or desirable within you. There's a big difference there. And when it came to my hair, and actually not even just my hair, but we'll stick with the hair for now, the energy behind my hair was not to express myself differently or play. It was to actually avoid that feeling of rejection and this deep feeling of this is not attractive or desirable within me. And from there, I think I actually started to I would blow dry my hair smooth, and then I would straighten certain parts, bangs and what have you, and I would actually then curl with a curling iron my hair to have these like soft, loose curls and waves. And because my hair is naturally curly, I mean, I felt like that suited me more than like stick straight hair. but it still wasn't my natural hair texture. And when I went on vacations, like I would do anything at all costs to avoid water, to try to keep my hair in check. And I remember I had a friend a couple years ago, like she really pointed that out and reflected that to me, like, oh my God, you're not even enjoying this trip. Like, why don't you just let your hair be curly? It's so beautiful. And this is the thing with these aspects of ourselves that we tend to repress or deny or reject. No matter what anyone else says or sees in us, if it does not actually match how we feel about these parts of ourselves and the safety in expressing these parts of ourselves, it does not even matter. You could have someone telling you, you are so beautiful, I love this about you, I love that about you, but if you don't believe it, you're not actually receiving those compliments or comments or reflections. Which that right there, if you tend to have reflections from others that you don't believe yourself, that might be something to note down and to go into deeper inquiry around what is it in you that does not see that within yourself. And when was the first time that you learned that you did not possess those qualities or that you could not express those qualities? And to just start to get curious and ask yourself those questions. And so finally, in my hair journey, I at one point had my curling iron break, my round brush break, all within like days. Like there was a clear invitation, and universe and spirit was giving me a really clear nudge and push to like, hey, let's actually embrace what is natural within you, what is authentic and true within you. And I believe we choose our vessels, our bodies, our traits, like certain parts of ourselves and qualities and energies that are so innate within us for a reason. And so finally, I decided to experiment with my natural curl and texture, and I didn't even know what it would look like at this point or if it was even still all that curly because I had flat ironed it for probably almost 20 years. And so I ventured into the journey of actually embracing my natural curl. And you guys, for something that seems so surface level like hair, I feel like there were some lost soul fragments in there. I made a joke about that actually at the time because I had pulled a card that was speaking to lost soul fragments, and which is basically like fragmented off aspects of yourself. And so it actually required a lot of inner child healing and like seeing that younger version of me and being in touch with those feelings of rejection, those really deep feelings of rejection, and meeting those in order for me to be okay with rocking my natural hair texture. Isn't that crazy? And the energy that was liberated within me, oh, I can almost feel it as I speak to it now. It's like the amount of energy that was freed and made available within me when I chose to actually lean in to what was true for me, to the parts of myself that I had previously pushed away or rejected, was profound. Like I had a massive opening and just this liberation and this feeling of freedom and ease that came along with it. And this was actually last summer, so about a year ago, that I took this journey into my natural hair texture. And here I am talking about something that seems relatively surface level. However, I had already had to meet so much of myself that I had repressed on an emotional level, on an energetic level, even on a spiritual level, before I was able to get to the point where my physical vessel caught up. And not that it has to go that way, but my point is that I had done so much deep healing work to actually meet the parts of me that I had repressed, whether that be old emotions, whether that be being able to express my needs, whether that be my own divinity, my own power, like the messy parts of me, the outspoken parts of me that had an opinion, the rebel parts of me, all of these parts that I had repressed into my shadow. Those parts had to be met before I could even journey into this simple thing, this so-called simple thing that I'm speaking of here when it comes to my hair. And the physical tends to follow the energetic. The physical is more dense than the energetic, than the emotional, because we can actually move through energetic changes quite quickly. However, it takes time for the more dense matter of our physical bodies and our experience, our reality, to actually catch up. And with that being said, I want to kind of dive into this topic around rejection of self when it comes to the body and autoimmune disease a little bit more here, because as I mentioned, the body often mirrors some sort of internal rejection of self on a deeper level. And if you experience symptoms of autoimmune disease, I'd be curious if this sparks anything for you. Because sometimes it does, and sometimes we're aware of that inner critic voice or the ways that we judge ourselves or the ways that we might pick apart our body, or aspects of our physical body. And then there's often much that is actually repressed into the unconscious. And when it gets to the level of autoimmune dis-ease, a lot of it is largely unconscious and aspects that we are not necessarily able to see. If we were able to see and come into contact with them, there would not be any necessity for the body to express symptoms because we would have integrated those aspects of self, and therefore there would be no need for the body to express any of the symptoms when it comes to those underlying energetics, at least. And so I have a few prompts that I'd like to share with you to actually feel into the parts of yourself that you may have a harder time expressing, a harder time accepting within yourself, and just to see what comes up for you. And so first and foremost, what I have a hard time accepting in myself is... So maybe that is some aspect on your physical body, on the physical level. I invite you to actually look at this, not just stopping at the physical level, but are there aspects of your personality that you tend to have a hard time accepting, or that you were taught were not acceptable, were too much, were not enough? So what do you have a hard time accepting in yourself? What were you told was unacceptable, was too much, was not enough within yourself? Maybe it was your anger, your power. Maybe it was your vulnerability. What was that voice that you can recall from very young? Maybe it was an echo of something you heard from your parents or a teacher or a caregiver or someone influential within your life, or even kids at school. What was that voice, that taunt, that shamed you, that disapproved of you? You're too blank. What was that thing for you? And then on the other side, the characteristics or traits that I tend to judge in others are, what do you tend to judge in other people? And the reason I ask this is because we tend to be triggered by expressions that are reflected in others that we have either denied, disowned, or repressed within ourselves, parts of ourselves that are actually wanting to be seen. So, what do you tend to judge or be triggered by in another, woman or man? A big one with women is potentially being triggered by women who are really owning their sexuality, their sensuality, their bodies. Or maybe you're triggered by your partner being able to just do nothing and sit there on the couch and be lazy. And in these examples, maybe it's because you've repressed your own sexuality, your own sensuality in the first example. And in the second, maybe it's because you've repressed or rejected your ability to actually rest and receive and care for yourself. Maybe you find yourself constantly busy and doing and giving to others. And maybe there's some sense of your identity or your worth, and therefore your safety, that is tied up in doing for others, in achieving whatever it might be. And what would it look like to actually choose yourself above all else? To choose what is true for you, what you actually desire, what you actually need. What does that bring up for you? What fears might come up around actually choosing yourself? When I say choosing yourself, I mean saying the thing that you want to say, doing the thing that you want to do, regardless of what impact it has on anybody else. And I'm not talking about going out and being reckless here. There's a funny meme actually that Mark Groves shared around when somebody comes out of their people-pleasing pattern for the first time, and it's Mr. Bean, and he's riding in a car and he's like flipping the bird to all these strangers, and he's just, he's like, F everybody. And I'm not talking about that necessarily, although it's funny because when we do come out of our people-pleasing patterns, or putting others and their needs above us, or really resisting parts of ourselves, it's almost like a ball that's been held underwater for a long time, and there's a lot of pressure, and so when you let go, it's like it shoots up in the air, and that energy needs to be liberated, and it's not always done in the cleanest and tidiest of ways. It can be a little bit messy. There can be a bit of a pendulum swing moment there where you kind of swing over to the other side, and maybe you are really needing to assert yourself, or do the opposite of what you have been doing. But I'm not necessarily going out there talking about intentionally going out there and acting in ways that are going to hurt people. What I'm talking about is if you actually do the thing that you want to do without basing your decision or collapsing in on your own desires or feelings based on what others would expect from you, what they think you should do, what you think you should do because that's what you've been taught you should do. I'm talking about actually choosing yourself, standing firm in your truth. What does that bring up for you in terms of fear? And you can even go a step further if this is resonating, and close your eyes and just ask your body to show you where you are holding those old imprints, those old stories, memories, and beliefs within your body. And just noticing the sensations that come up, that are present as the witness, as the observer. Just breathing into your body, into those spaces, and just creating the space to meet those fears, those parts of you that fear choosing yourself, that maybe fear disappointing others or experiencing disapproval from others. What would it look like to hold yourself through that so that you don't collapse in on yourself? You choose yourself even if that discomfort is there. That can be a really powerful practice when you create the space to actually go into that. So I invite you to do so if this is resonating. And I want to go into some of the energetic aspects of ourselves that I often see the women I work with rejecting or repressing within themselves. And I'll be curious to see if you resonate with any of this. So we talked about the physical level and what we might reject or criticize or judge on ourselves on a physical level. And again, oftentimes there are deeper aspects there, a deeper feeling of not enough, not good enough as I am, or too much. I'm too much. So feeling into that. And when it comes to personality traits, emotion is a big one. So if you tend to reject or deny emotion or certain emotions, that is actually rejecting a pretty important facet of your being. Not because you are those emotions, but because when we actually resist the flow of emotion, we're actually resisting life moving through us and truth to a large extent. That's often why so many of us resist the flow of emotion. We fear feeling that emotion and coming into truth with what is and the change that might be required or the action that might be required if we were to come into that truth. And so when we resist or reject or deny emotion, to some extent, on some level, we are often rejecting our truth. So let's take anger, for example. So say you tend to really repress anger. And what that might look like for you is you just don't get angry. You tend to be pretty even-keeled. You tend to be, pretty agreeable among people. You are just a nice person. You're a good, nice person. You don't get angry. So first of all, if you tend to repress or reject the energy of anger, and I don't typically use the word reject when I'm talking about emotion, but because we are talking about aspects of self-rejection, I'm using the word reject here for a reason. And really it is to help draw the parallel between rejection of aspects of self and the body rejecting itself. So when we tend to reject the feeling or expression of anger, this might come out in shadow ways. So you might see yourself kind of blowing up or reacting outwards in situations that would not necessarily call for that magnitude of anger, likely because you've held so much in that it literally just explodes out of you. So those are some of the more shadow ways that anger, when it is pushed down, can come out. But what happens when we actually reject the energy of anger moving through us is that because anger is the emotion, the very sacred, important emotion that comes up, that informs us of our no, that informs us when something is crossing a boundary, is not meeting our need, does not feel right to us or for someone that we love and care about, we are actually not receiving that feedback and the truth of that feedback. which means we can be out of touch with our no. We can be out of touch with our boundaries. So if this is resonating for you, I'm curious what your relationship is with boundaries, with if you're able to actually create healthy boundaries between yourself and others, to actually communicate and express your needs and to hold those boundaries without collapsing it on yourself. Without this perceived or real fear of what that person how they may respond or react to those boundaries. Typically, that real or perceived discomfort there is why we tend to struggle with boundaries. There's usually some sort of unmet pain involved. But nevertheless, when we reject the energy of anger, emotion in general, it has nowhere else to go. We lose access to our truth. On some level, we are often actually rejecting our truth. We are deviating from our truth in order to somehow keep the peace, placate another person, not rock the boat, whatever it is, to please others, to uphold this image of being this nice, good girl. And again, there's often unmet pain beneath that of potentially feelings of rejection, which that's often the invitation there is to meet those feelings so that they don't have this charge and hold over you, so that you're not trying to avoid those within all of your reactions, which in doing so, you are often rejecting yourself and your actual needs. And I will never forget when I had first heard that oftentimes this pattern of people pleasing is actually quite manipulative on some level. So much of the time, people who want to please others believe that they want to treat others kindly and be nice and serve other people's needs. And it can seem like this very noble thing to do. However, when you actually unpack the underlying energetics and the motive there, it's often this deeper desire to control their perceptions of you so that you don't have to feel the pain of rejection or disapproval. And so you actually contort yourself to avoid that. And you're not actually showing up as you. And so the first time that I heard that, it was several years ago, and it was actually my counselor who I was unpacking this with, and it hit me like a gut punch, because I too used to identify as this nice girl, good girl, I'm just nice. I'm just a nice person. And so when I actually saw the truth of what it was that was going on beneath that, not that I was intentionally trying to manipulate or control perceptions of others, but the mechanics of these unconscious motives were not previously seen by me. And so it was a real gut punch there. And so if you're listening to this and that hit you, I am just extending so much compassion to you, because again, so many of these patterns, these repressed aspects of ourselves, they're repressed for a reason, because there is pain around them. And so I hope that you can see that, or anything that's come up within this episode, with so much compassion towards yourself, so that you're not further judging yourself, further rejecting yourself for what you may have internalized. Doing your best to see that with compassion, seeing the underlying motive, because a lot of the times these patterns exist to serve us in some way, to help us meet our needs on some level. And so maybe that is a need for belonging, for safety, for love. wanting to belong and be loved and be safe is not wrong. And as children, we learn all of these different mechanisms to have our needs met. And that's not wrong. It's just that when we get to the point where we are starting to become more aware of these mechanisms, and even if you're not aware of the mechanisms, but your body is screaming at you through pain, through symptoms, that's a pretty clear invitation here to look inwards and to start to create some space to unpack these deeper invitations, the deeper energetics at play, and to meet these aspects of yourself, to reconcile your relationship with these aspects of yourself. Because what happens in particular with autoimmune disease, the way I see it anyways, is that when we repress these traits within ourselves, it's like there's this internal split within us, right? So one part of us might fragment off, and that one part of us might want something different than another part of us. So say you are wanting to be in this healthy, connected relationship and to really be seen in your truth for all of you and to be loved for all of you. And then there's this part of you that's like, nope, those traits aren't lovable. That's not going to be okay. That's not going to be accepted. There's often then this inner split between a part of you that wants to express and be seen and loved and a part of you that is withholding or contorting certain aspects or truths within yourself, not allowing certain parts of you to come to the table in order to protect yourself. So it can create this inner fragmentation where you're essentially at odds with yourself. You're in this inner fight or conflict with yourself, whether you're aware of it or not. And I know some of the clients that I've worked with, they have been aware of a lot of this to some extent, meaning you might be aware that you have this inner voice, this inner critic that comes up that picks apart certain physical traits. Or when you go out and you say something, you may come home and have this inner critic start to pick apart what you said, and you shouldn't have said that, and that was too much. And, just judging yourself in these ways. Or you shouldn't do that. That's too this, that's too that. Don't wear that. You're too old for that. Or don't do that movement when you're in the gym because that's inappropriate, or whatever it is. We tend to have this inner conflict within ourselves. So it's like this inner fight, which is so energetically reflective of what is happening with autoimmune disease on a physical level. So just these are some examples of the underlying energetics that I see at play. And there are some autoimmune conditions that are quite pervasive in nature. I know for me, I had like whole systematic involvement within my body. So it was like my entire body was involved, and I can see why now, because my entirety of my being was sort of misaligned with truth. I had been repressing emotion. I had all of these beliefs that were not based in truth, that were coming up left, right, and center to be seen, to be reconciled. All these parts and aspects of myself that I repressed and shunned and put away because I learned that they were not appropriate. They were not approved of. They got me into trouble. They had some adverse consequence happen when I expressed them. And a lot of those aspects of myself were closely connected to my voice and using my voice, expressing myself, my feelings, my truth, my needs, how I felt. And in particular, for me, it was the more fiery aspects of myself. Like I remember, and I can relate to this one particular client that I had, and she had said, like, I've always had an opinion. I've always had something to say. I almost felt like I was more consciously evolved than my parents. Like I would say, well, that's not right. Like, how is that right? How is that fair? And I know that I had similar experiences as a child where if my parents punished me, I would be like, I don't think that's an appropriate punishment. to the extent that they thought I was going to be a lawyer or something, because I was so firm and like opinionated in how I felt. But what happens over time, like I know for a fact it's not easy to parent this type of child. A child who pushes the boundaries and who really is expressive in their needs, and they sort of push the envelope and they ask these deeper questions. Because as a parent, if you have these old, ancient, I want to say, beliefs that like children should be seen and not heard, and you can't question me, and I'm the parent, I'm the boss here, like don't give in, they're just a kid, don't let them have any power, like this power struggle energy and dynamic around children. Having a child like that is going to push your buttons and bump up against those beliefs and probably going to trigger you. And if you were not aware that that was happening, you probably just reacted outwards to the child rather than actually going inwards, turning your eyes within and seeing those beliefs and kind of reconciling with yourself. Because a lot of the time, those are patterns that were passed on through the generations. And here we are expanding our consciousness through the generations. And these things are coming up for healing. Like this is what generational trauma and these generational patterns are. If you are here and listening to this, you are somebody who is actually challenging and reconciling and healing those old generational patterns. And oftentimes, like similar to how we inherit the physical traits of our parents, we also inherit these energetic patterns, these old beliefs. And part of that, of course, is through our experience with them. And another part of it is often inherited through our DNA. It lives within us. And so that's why sometimes when we're doing this healing work, I know at least for me and a lot of the women that I have worked with, it can feel bigger than ourselves. Because a lot of the time it often is. But so I had learned that like I needed to shut down my voice and to stop questioning things and to stop having like a fiery opinion or, ruffling the feathers because I got punished for it. And that's how these beliefs and these patterns work, is that through repetition, we learn what earns us love and connection and belonging and safety, both within our family unit, which is then projected out to the world at large, to the universe. And that's where we can start to repress, deny, or reject those aspects of self. So for me, my voice, my truth, my desire to question what doesn't make sense and to create change, that was so innate within me as a young child. And I, to a large degree, lost touch with that because it wasn't honored and celebrated. And as I say that, I honor the challenge that is as a mother to celebrate that and to honor that and to foster that trait within a child, because I too have a child. My daughter is like a little mirror of me, but like turned up a few notches. Like she is just like expressive and wild, and she has her own opinions, and she's fiery. She's a Leo. She came out like fully on fire. And so she's been such a beautiful mirror for me to actually reconcile with and meet those aspects of myself, because I have had to, in order to parent her consciously in a way that I've wanted to. And when I say I had to, of course, this was my own conscious choice. And I made the choice to actually look inwards when I was being triggered by her and to unpack why I was so triggered by her. So I want to give myself credit, and for those of you who are doing that same work, credit, because this is not a requirement. We have free will. We have choice of whether we choose to lean in to the discomfort, to what is triggering us for our own growth, for our own freedom, for our children's freedom, and for really in service to change and creating a more loving and beautiful world that so many of you, if you're here, are listening for. And I made that choice. And that was really to be able to parent her in a way that I was wanting to parent her, to show up in a more calm, centered, grounded way, and to be able to support her in the ways that I wanted to. And so it's interesting because, like I said, we tend to see and be triggered by in others the very qualities that we tend to repress, deny, or reject within ourselves. And there are massive invitations there to actually unpack and meet those repressed aspects of ourselves so that we can start to create more internal harmony so that we aren't in such a state of internal fight. When we're in a state of internal conflict and fight, that is not ease, that is dis-ease. And so, like I said, this is a loaded topic. This whole topic of rejection of self versus acceptance of self. And it is so profoundly mirrored through the body. And yeah, I mean, it's something that I'm so passionate about further. I'm a complete student to it, and I absolutely immerse myself in this. And it's actually what I go deeply into within my immersion called Rooted, which is a 12-week journey. It is a hybrid, self-paced and live journey, which takes you deep into uncovering and understanding the very roots of the physical symptoms that you experience, to reconciling with your body and all the aspects of the self that you may need to meet on a deeper level, and really become equipped with the tools, the framework, and the sense of self-empowerment to continue along on your journey. And I called it Rooted not only because we were looking at the roots of physical symptoms, but because to be rooted in oneself is to be like stable and secure. Like if you think about a tree with its roots, like they are deep into the shadows, they are anchored. And it's really about anchoring into yourself, into your truth. And it's a beautiful journey that I would be so honored for you to consider. And so if this is resonating with you, I really invite you to check it out and to ask if you do have any questions that come up. And as I'm looking at my notes here, I also wanted to speak to rejection of self on one of the levels that we haven't touched on yet, and that is our spirit, our light. And so one piece that I didn't realize that I had been rejecting or abandoning within myself until relatively more recently was my light, my soul's calling, you could say. And sometimes I wonder if this is one of the most profound and core areas of abandonment of self, of rejection, is really like our divinity, our light, the calling of our soul, our intuition, because it's at the other end of the spectrum from our conditioning. Like if you think about it, when we are operating based on our conditioning and our beliefs and what we've been made to believe that we should do and should show up as, we are often quite far from our divinity, from our power, from our intuition, from what is true for us. And so I wanted to bring that in here as well, because for the longest time, in following what I believed I should be doing, I was, without knowing it, actually abandoning my vision, my soul's vision for myself. And if you're one of my clients that I've worked with for a while, maybe this is speaking to you, because I know that this is something that can naturally come up as we start to delayer and unpack what is not ours, to carry any further, and to start to build some capacity to actually stand in and with ourselves when it comes to expressing emotion, when it comes to expressing needs and making choices that align with our truth. What can emerge is this inner realization that, there's actually something else that I'm feeling called to do or to explore. And I think that that thing is within us all along, and perhaps we hadn't given ourselves permission to go there. But for me, this has been something that has come up more in the last couple of years, has been really accepting my own power, my relationship to my own inner divinity, which I believe that I really rejected on some level. And I think that we don't always need to know something is there or not to reject it, because it can be so unconscious within us. It can be almost forgotten. And I think that can be the case too when it comes to our inner divinity. And so sometimes actually giving ourselves permission to move in the direction of what it is that we are wanting to do, that thing that is pulling at us, that is tugging on us through our curiosity, when we actually take the step towards that thing, I think that is such an act of choosing ourselves. And whether that is in making a change within your life, whether that's moving out of a relationship or changing jobs or starting an immersion or looking for a mentor, oftentimes this can be one of those moments when you are actually choosing yourself. And maybe that is outside of what others would have expected you to do or what they think you should be doing, or maybe you have to ask for some sort of help or support in order to do that thing, meaning you have to actually take up space and be in your own space and actually follow what is true for you in that moment. That can be powerful medicine for you or for someone in the context of having rejected yourself or that truth or those inner callings within yourself. It can be the very medicine that helps to create more congruency within yourself, more ease within yourself, and starting this trajectory of also continuing along the path of meeting those deeper aspects of self, those potentially those parts of you that thought you were not enough as you are, or those old inner beliefs and ancient stories that you had adopted as your own. So it can be really, really powerful to actually engage in an act of choosing yourself. So I invite you to consider this for yourself, whether that's in a little tiny nibble, little bite-sized something that comes up in a way that you could choose yourself today, this week, this month, this summer, whatever that might be. Can be a really powerful declaration of our within ourselves and towards ourselves that can actually break the old template and start to create this new template around what it looks like to meet yourself, even if, to choose yourself, to move towards your truth, even if it's not fully comfortable, and to start building the capacity within yourself to do that more and more on bigger and bigger levels. With that said, I wanted to leave you with something that I had read in the last couple of days from a beautiful oracle deck. It's called Love Who You Are by Angie Sullins. It's beautiful. I actually bought it for myself on Mother's Day. And when you open the book, there is a poem, and it's called Becoming Her. And it says, "Leaving the house of expectation is a painful road very few talk about. Departing the carefully constructed structures you've so arduously built in the name of doing good, doing right, fitting in, being a good daughter and a better woman, good wife, good mother, good citizen, good neighbor, Good God. Leaving the house of your identity can feel like abandonment. The rooms of your relationships, the porch of your perfection, the windows of your worldview, the cellar of your security, and the attic of your stored away dreams and forgotten talents suddenly feel too small for you. All the goodness, the servitude, the way you twist and bend to earn a portion of love and approval is a tiny rabbit's house, Alice, and you were meant to live in a castle. The path out of the woods and through the woods of uncertainty is daunting, but it leads to her. The woman you are becoming will cost you people and spaces, comfort and material things. But nothing costs as much as living in a shape too small for you. Choose her over everything. I thought that was so beautiful and so beautifully sums up this conversation around choosing the self versus rejecting the self, and what it can look like and feel like when we do start to, first and foremost, become in touch with ourselves, and secondly, choosing ourselves, which I feel like is a circular journey. A lot of the times, the women that I work with come to me and they are actually in a place of not actually knowing who they are. They've come from a place where they've given up so much of themselves or bended or contorted themselves in ways where they aren't even sure who they are. Or maybe they have had their identity so anchored into what they did for a living, into roles and how they showed up within their lives, that they don't actually know who they are without all of those things. And I think that that is a beautiful place to be in. If that is you, can that be okay in this moment? Because the beauty of that space is that you get to now choose to create the space to actually feel into who you truly are, beneath all of the labels, beneath all of the shoulds and the expectations and layers of conditioning that said how you needed to be. And you get to actually just be you. And that's the thing. Once we start to strip away these old aspects of our identity, we actually are left with ourselves. And sometimes that can be a scary process. And I've had clients reflect, what if there's nothing left? Like, what if I still don't know who I am? What if there's nothing there? So it takes trust. It takes trust in yourself. And I think that is part of the medicine as well, because that is built through the journey of repeatedly choosing yourself. You start to build this trust and this sense of power within yourself. And I know for me, like, probably one of the biggest acts of choosing myself within the last several years was actually making the choice to separate from my kid's dad. And I haven't mentioned this before on this podcast yet, but that choice, as you can imagine, comes with so much weight and the heaviness of what this means for the family, and in particular for my kids and for me. And I had actually been with him for, I think it was over 17 years at the time that I made the choice to separate. I was somewhat or largely dependent on him financially, and it was a very difficult choice for me to make. However, in actually coming into truth with what it was that I was feeling, and that the relationship was no longer serving either of us or our kids for that matter, because it was not the type of relationship that I would have wished for either of them. And it wasn't serving my journey forwards. I made the choice to actually choose myself, to choose love, which sometimes love and loving ourselves can look differently than what others or society thinks that we should do and what love is. So it was a really radical act of choosing myself and what was true for me, and a leap of faith, a leap of trust, both within myself and within the universe, within God, for what that plan really was. And it's taken me on this beautiful journey of actually getting to know myself and fully coming into myself. And it does not take a separation, I want to say, to do that. In fact, I think when we can create spaces to actually be more in tune with ourselves and to express our truth and, to actually take up more space as all of us rather than less of us, those relationships that are in alignment with us and our soul's journey and growth, and that are actually built on genuine love and care, are going to adapt to that version of you that is more of you, that is truer you. And the relationships that are built around less of you, maybe around what serves the other person, around what is not in alignment, are likely going to fall away. And that can be a scary part of choosing yourself, because it actually means having to be with this feeling of discomfort, of disappointing someone, or of others' opinions, or of disapproval, which is the very thing that actually causes us to abandon ourselves to begin with. So you actually directly meet those energies of disapproval, of rejection, of abandonment that have caused you to contort yourself or reject yourself to begin with. And I think that's such powerful medicine. And you don't need to do that alone. And it's not that you need to make some big choice like that overnight. It's a process of meeting yourself deeper and deeper, and being held within that journey, and building the capacity within your system, within your nervous system, within your somatic vessel and body, to actually be able to choose yourself on larger and larger and larger levels, so that you are no longer rejecting aspects of yourself, whether that is your emotions, your needs, your desires, to build this beautiful space of internal trust and empowerment and acceptance of yourself, where you can truly hold yourself in such honor and reverence and acceptance, and just really see yourself and meet yourself for and in all of those choices that you have made towards yourself. And I tell you from experience, it is the most beautiful journey imaginable. It can be messy, it's not without its challenges, but so worth it and so beautiful. And so with that, I hope that you have taken something of value from listening to this conversation. I'm curious what it's brought up for you. And so please feel free to leave a comment, send me an email, let me know what this has brought up for you. And if it has resonated, I invite you to check out Rooted. I invite you to also look at the show notes. You can find my newsletter there. I send out newsletters and more details around offers and ways to get into my world there as well. And I will see you in the next episode. I am sending you so much love and encouragement on your journey. And I have such deep, profound belief in you and your healing.